Bring to the conversation former spokesperson for the U.S. mission to the UN, Hagar Shamali. She also worked at the National Security Council and the Treasury Department. Want to get into the Lebanon and Israeli extension of the ceasefire there, but also get you in on this conversation about the New York Times report about the depleted munitions, and that people inside the Pentagon are saying that we are at critically low levels. You have some skepticism about that report.
Well, yeah, and that's because I've worked on wars in the U.S. when I was in the U.S. government, and there is a level of combat readiness that the United States government is required to maintain to protect our own homeland. That's normal. That's standard. And we've heard this claim before, right? When we were heavily arming the Ukrainians, we also heard the same claim. Oh, we're depleting our stockpiles. We can't do it anymore. And yet we were able to somehow miraculously, and still, by the way, be able to then give arms to Israel after October 7, and by the way, now be involved in Iran. That's not magic. That's because we maintain certain we maintain certain stockpiles that we have to maintain for our own combat readiness, but also we are very easily able to ramp up production. That we did ramp up production, more was invested, and I'm just not as worried about it. Yes, we need to keep an eye on it, but you have thousands of military officials, not political, military rank and file who work on this for a living, and they know very well how to do this.
That's a good point. Let's move to the peace talks that took place in Washington yesterday. Lebanon and Israel elevated the president being involved directly in them. What was your takeaway? Good signs of progress there?
Yes, very good signs of progress, certainly from all three sides. I work on this issue very intimately. And what's interesting is, by the way, that meeting was fairly at the last minute moved to the White House and hosted by President Trump himself. That was not the original plan. And so it's exciting because you see the White House prioritizing this. The reason for which is likely because the president sees a potential win here, an opportunity, something that they can prioritize this because there's something good to come out of it. It's a good piece of news, particularly with what's going on in Iran. Some of the highlights I thought that were really important was, one, that the president invited Lebanese President Aoun and Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu to the White House. It's the second time he says that. I think that's amazing. I do think it'll eventually happen. It would be historic. But the fact that he's going right for it. The second is that he talked about this law in Lebanon that prohibits Lebanese from even speaking to Israelis. And he said, no, that's got to go. We got to get rid of that. That is one of the biggest impediments to peace. And the third and the most important is that he highlighted, and he used, I thought these words were carefully calibrated, where he said, we're going to help Lebanon protect itself against Hezbollah. And that's the uniting factor here that makes these talks different than any moment in time. Why they're so historic and significant is the fact that you have two partners genuinely at the table who want a peace deal. Why? Because they see Hezbollah together as an enemy, Hezbollah as an Iranian entity, using Lebanon's land as a war launch pad. And so those words were chosen very carefully, right? We're in this together against Hezbollah. And I think that's going to be the theme going on.
Yeah, some real signs of progress, to be sure. And I think you're right. Trump is eager for a win, perhaps even a Nobel Peace Prize. Let's talk, though, about, we know that Iran insisted that there be a ceasefire in that conflict, the Israel-Lebanon conflict, before negotiations could continue. So far, that's held. The other stuff has not, most particularly the U.S. naval blockade, Tehran saying that has to go before we talk again. So perhaps it's connected to what we're seeing in this Lebanon talks or not. But if you could forecast, where does this go right now in terms of the Iran war? Because it does seem to be a pain threshold question. And right now the question is who can take more? And it seems to be a very split answer.
Yeah, so a lot in there. First, you're right. On the Iranian side, they are trying to buy time. Time for them is everything. If they have time to rebuild, to restock, to reorganize. One of the things that Trump did note in the extension for the ceasefire is that, and he's not wrong on this, is the fact that the Iranian regime is now fractured and doesn't really know who's exactly leading. And it is actually fractured. There's a lot of infighting, a lot of suspicion among them. And now, I don't love that he said that publicly as a point of negotiation, because the Iranians view that as him blinking. But nonetheless, it is true that they are fractured. They are still trying to buy time, and Trump clearly does want a deal. We do see that as well. At the same time, you have this question of the blockade. Blockades, like any financial measure, and I can tell you because I worked in sanctions for a long time, they generally take time to work. They do work, but they take time. They're not immediate. And the Iranian regime, while it can sustain a lot of pain and financial pressure, there is going to be a point at which they're not going to be able to pay their soldiers. And I always say this, that dictators are only as strong as their militaries are loyal. And if they're not being able to put food on the table, they're not going to be loyal for a while. That has its own risks, by the way, because it could lead to a military coup. Very tenuous situation. Now, on Lebanon, because you put it in context, while I'm glad that these tracks are being pursued very separately, and the administration is very careful to make that clear because they don't want to imply that Iran has any say in Lebanon. That's the crux of this, right? And I personally like that, too. I would be remiss if I didn't mention that these peace talks are happening in the context of Iran, and the Trump administration does not want Lebanon to be a sore spot while talks in Islamabad are happening.
Former spokesperson for the U.S. mission to the United Nations, Hagar Shamali. Always great to have your expertise here, Hagar. Thanks so much.